Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to dive into exactly how a localized military standoff has, well, essentially hijacked the fragile global energy system. How does a kinetic strike on the other side of the world threaten the actual food on your table? Let's trace the ripple effects of the 2026 Iran conflict together. What started as a targeted military operation has rapidly evolved into a scenario that is challenging the basic foundations of our interconnected world. We're looking at the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the incredibly complex, cascading crises that have followed. To make sense of all this, we're going to unpack the timeline in 5 quick parts. 1. Operation Epic Fury. 2. The Strait of Hormuz. 3. The fog of war. 4. The global energy crisis. And finally, 5. The LNG fertilizer paradox. Let's jump right into part 1, Operation Epic Fury. We'll start by examining the initial shockwave that shattered the status quo on February 28, 2026. So, following a total diplomatic breakdown over nuclear threshold intelligence, which was basically undeniable proof that Iran was crossing the final technical red lines to build a functional nuclear weapon, the US and Israel launched what was dubbed Operation Epic Fury. We're talking nearly 900 precision strikes in just the first 12 hours. It's honestly hard to wrap your head around that sheer scale. They deliberately targeted massive command and control centers, ballistic missile facilities, and those deeply buried underground nuclear sites like Fordow and Natanz. Now, those initial decapitation strikes did achieve a major tactical objective, the elimination of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. And obviously this created a brief, profound power vacuum. But the regime bounced back surprisingly fast. Within days, the Assembly of Experts named his successor, Mojtaba Khamenei. His very first move? Formalizing a devastating decree of maximum asymmetric retaliation, which is really just a highly technical way of saying they weren't going to fight a traditional army-to-army war. Instead, they decided to use unconventional means to inflict massive economic pain and literally lay siege to the global economy. Just like that, the regional conflict completely transformed. Which brings us to part 2, the Strait of Hormuz. This is our first-order ripple, the massive military standoff over the world's most critical maritime choke point. For decades, Iran designed its specialized asymmetric naval force to draw the U.S. into what's literally called a knife fight, right inside the Strait of Hormuz. It was designed as a massive trap. Think about it. This is a 21-mile-wide waterway. Iran's logic was brutal but simple. Block the strait, trigger an agonizing global energy crisis, and basically force the U.S. Navy to rush major multi-billion-dollar surface ships into a confined, heavily trapped coastal zone just to reopen it. But here's the fascinating pivot. Washington completely anticipated this exact trap, and they didn't take the bait. So instead of rushing those expensive destroyers into a narrow bottleneck just to get picked off, the U.S. initially sidelined the waterway altogether. They widened the campaign. They started dismantling Iran's coastal threats from a safe distance using A-10 Warthogs, Apache helicopters, and highly innovative drone swarms launched from literal combat ships safely outside the immediate danger zone. But even with those U.S. strikes, Iran successfully deployed a saturated, multi-layered technological iron curtain to completely deny maritime access. We're talking about signature-agnostic smart sea mines, meaning underwater explosives that can literally hide from advanced detection systems and wait specifically for the acoustic signatures of massive oil tankers. Add in explosive unmanned suicide boats directed by satellite, shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles, and incredibly resilient underground missile cities, and they effectively turned a highly navigable channel into a total no-go zone for any unescorted commercial vessel. It's a truly horrific environment for global shipping. All right, moving on to part 3, the fog of war. Let's look at an incident that perfectly highlights the intense information war going on here. On May 7th, 3 U.S.-guided missile destroyers were fired upon while transiting the strait, but the reported outcomes? Completely contradictory. U.S. Central Command states they intercepted all incoming threats, safely transited, and struck Iranian launch sites in self-defense with 0 U.S. casualties. Meanwhile, Iran's IRGC claims a highly successful combined operation that caused significant damage, forcing the U.S. ships to flee. 2 completely opposite stories. Because both state actors have massive strategic incentives to project strength, we absolutely have to look at both of these official narratives with a very healthy dose of skepticism. What we do know for sure is that both governments are aggressively distorting the reality of the conflict. For instance, independent NASA satellite data proves that something major burned in the strait that night. But deliberate imagery blackouts from commercial providers make it incredibly hard to verify exactly what. Furthermore, while the U.S. consistently downplays overall damage, independent analysis by the Washington Post, using verifiable satellite imagery, found at least 228 damaged structures at 15 U.S. bases across the region since February. And the Pentagon itself admits there is no final number on base damage costs. So the actual battlefield reality, it remains highly, highly ambiguous.
Part 4. The Global Energy Crisis. Let's look at how this kinetic ambiguity instantly triggered our second-order ripple.
Traditional supply and demand fundamentals, they've completely collapsed. They've been replaced by what's called a fear-based discovery model. Markets aren't just pricing in the oil we use today anymore, they're terrified of the oil that might be destroyed tomorrow. This has created a massive geopolitical risk premium. That extra $30 to $35 per barrel isn't just a temporary spike. It's become a permanent structural floor, essentially a permanent fear tax on the entire global system. And the physical reality driving that fear is totally unprecedented. Right now, approximately 20 million barrels per day of crude and refined products are suddenly landlocked. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 20% of total global daily consumption. Just trapped, physically trapped behind a 21-mile highly contested maritime choke point. And alternative overland pipelines simply do not have the capacity to make up that immense difference. This deficit was so severe that even when the world cracked open its emergency piggy bank, with the International Energy Agency releasing a staggering 400 million barrels of strategic reserves, it just wasn't enough to plug the gap. This structural shortfall drove Brent crude to massive peaks of $126 a barrel, again, acting as a massive, unavoidable tax on the global economy. And it gets crazier. The financial services sector suffered a literal risk explosion. With anti-ship missiles flying and smart mines deployed, maritime underwriters completely panicked. War risk insurance surcharges for standard tankers spiked an astronomical 800%. Listen to this mind-boggling stat. For a single transit, the cost of just insuring the boat often became more expensive than the fuel required to sail it. No way around it. That is just wild.
Finally, Part 5, the LNG fertilizer paradox.
This leads us directly to the third-order ripple, which is arguably the most terrifying and hidden consequence of the entire conflict. Academic research, specifically from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, reveals that the true danger to the Global South lies not just in the price of crude oil. The weaponization of this strait triggered a massive, cascading disruption that directly chained energy scarcity to global food security. There was massive collateral damage to natural gas. The blockade forced Qatar's enormous Ras Laffan facility to declare force majeure. With tankers unable to safely transit, they had to abruptly halt production. That single event instantly ripped 20% of the entire world's liquefied natural gas supply completely off the global market. 20%. Gone. Just like that. This LNG shutdown immediately paralyzed global urea production, which is a critical agricultural process that relies heavily on natural gas. And that triggered a massive 35% spike in fertilizer costs worldwide. The timing literally couldn't have been worse. This hit precisely as Asia's critical Kharif sowing season began, threatening agricultural yields for billions of people. Less food grown in Asia means higher grocery bills and immediate food insecurity for everyone, everywhere. This invisible supply chain bulwark effect proves that our modern reliance on extreme, just-in-time efficiency is totally failing under geopolitical stress. For decades, the world relied on getting energy exactly when needed to keep costs low. But that era is breaking. It's forcing major importing nations to aggressively pivot toward energy sovereignty, prioritizing raw baseload security over sustainability and efficiency. We're seeing major nations like India forced into emergency Atmanirbhar, or self-reliance, resource rationing just to keep their massive economies functioning in the face of this shock. As this military stalemate drags on and the ripple effects expand all the way from the Strait of Hormuz down to the grocery shelves in Asia, we have to ask ourselves a vital question. Has this conflict permanently killed the illusion of a secure, interconnected global economy? If the world's most critical choke point can be shut down by a localized conflict, what does true global security actually look like tomorrow? Thank you for watching this explainer, and keep questioning the systems that power our world.